I'm about to talk about something that I should have talked about a long time ago, but haven't, and that is why communism is the most practical, legitimate form of freedom for the individual and for society as a whole. Most of my viewers are American, so this goes out to the American viewers. How you have a U.S. Constitution that guarantees you the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and goes on to say that your Second Amendment is the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, freedom of religion, and then you compromise it by suggesting that there's a difference between that applying to public property and private property. And nowhere in the Constitution does this say there's a difference. People have just went off on a tangent and made that difference. And then you don't want people to say that you're a fascist, that you're reactionary, that you just want tyranny. But meanwhile, you have this Constitution laid out in a, very vague form that can be taken to much more extreme examples, and you take it for granted and just say that private property can do whatever they want to. That just eludes me. It eludes me how you have these rights laid out, but meanwhile, you're willing to, just take them for granted in favor of private enterprise being able to decide those rights for you, and thereby making them privileges. Why would you choose privileges over rights? Because the Constitution was vague, I think that the forefathers did that on purpose so that they could abuse it, but that doesn't mean that society should let it continue. I mean, yes, the United States was founded on rich white slavers that, basically exploited labor, exploited land, exploited foreigners, and killed them all for that land. But that doesn't mean you have to continue that trend. Because of the very fact that it's so vague, you can make it much more extreme to your advantage for your personal rights. But nobody seems to want to. And that just blows my mind. So, most countries have a much more laid out constitution than America, and more so they give the rights to the government to what they can sanction, how they can sanction it, etc., rather than this vague list of rights that we supposedly represent and that we defend, we hold dear to our hearts. So, if you really believe in these freedoms, why don't you act like it? I mean, when I talk about moderators, I'm not talking about you getting banned from a little forum that you go to. I mean, yeah, that's a bad thing. That should not happen morally or legally. But I'm talking about the more extreme cases, where your Facebook is more or less your identity. And that identity is being taken away from you because of some assholes behind the monitor. What I'm talking about is how you pay, how much money a month for Xbox Live, and that gets stripped from you even though you paid for that service. What I'm talking to you about is how you have a PayPal account, which is your bank account more or less, and you get locked out of it, and, where does your money go? So those are the kinds of issues I'm bringing up, and that's not going to go away unless you make it go away. It's only going to get worse. If you don't recognize the problem now, it's going to intensify, and these corporations are going to exploit that. That's what they do. That's why they're capitalists. And how they gain capital is by exploitation, whether it be exploiting people, exploiting labor, exploiting land and resources. That's how they make their money and get their power. So, why wouldn't you use the law to advantage yourself and the people as a whole rather than the bourgeois? So, that's the main reason why I'm a communist. More so than anything else, it is because the rights should belong to me, as the individual, the worker, not to the bourgeois institutions that already have control over all the land and the resources. I think they have more than enough freedom. It's about time that freedom get redistributed, not just the wealth of that freedom. And that's something that most people ignore. So, explain to me how a right-wing ideology can secure personal freedoms. Explain to me how, if you're a constitutionalist, for example, you are going to help perpetuate the extreme examples of the Constitution to secure personal liberties. Or, even if you're not a constitutionalist, let's go a step further and say you're a libertarian tard. where you believe in absolute private property. And since you believe in absolute private property, the Constitution no longer applies because that only conveniently applies to public property, which you don't want. So, explain to me how you can physically be free if everybody around you that owns property and shit can tell you what to do. I mean, yes, you can own property too, but then the argument isn't that you're free, it's that you have as much leverage to tyrannize other people as anybody else. That's not freedom. That's just murder balling. That's just Mad Max. Why should we live like that? Why would we want to live like that? Why would we fight to live like that? So, you know, those are the kinds of issues I bring up. And the reason why I'm against nationalism so vehemently, even though nationalism doesn't quite work like libertarianism, is because nationalism only secures the rights for whatever people they're representing. And even then, they don't do it extremely well. You know, to be a nationalist is to say that rights apply to a group of people based on race or religion or national origin, but not to another group of people, or at least not to the same extent. So while some nationalists might be less racist than others, while some nationalists might be more well-meaning than others, ultimately they're going to say, my inner circle has more righteousness, my inner circle is of more importance than your circle. And that's why I don't like to see anybody making barriers based on gender or sexual orientation or things like that. That's why I talk about homosexuality. Because homosexuals are not, they're just adding to the problem. They're just compounding the already nationalist mentality of America by making it all the worse by saying, oh, we're a group of people too, and our rights have to be secured. Fuck everybody else's rights. What about our rights? Our little box. You know, stop thinking in terms of boxes. It's people. People have rights. You have rights, I have rights, and those should be talked about. We need to explain what rights exist for people. And if you want to argue that homosexuality is about personal rights, that you have the personal right to fuck whoever you want to fuck and marry whoever you fuck you want to marry and things like that, that's all well and good. But then make that individual case that that's a right that belongs to everybody and needs to be legally recognized. Not that somehow your particular group is being victimized, that it's being singled out, and that every time somebody opposes you, they're homophobic or some bullshit. Because then you're giving emphasis to the group. You're saying my group is in danger, and this person is against my group, and that's hateful. No, they're against rights. That's what makes it hateful. Has nothing to do with your group. It shouldn't have to do anything with your group. The only person that's being hateful is you by classifying people A and people B. So that's why I'm against right-wing mentality, and that's why right-wing ideologies can't secure freedoms for everybody, let alone, you know, well, everybody, yeah. I was going to say they can't secure freedoms for most people, let alone all people, and sometimes they can't even do it for some people. Right-wing ideology, regardless of what situation it is, nationalism, libertarianism, blah, 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 you know, they require the rights of less and less people, not more. So, you know, until somebody can argue to the contrary of that, I'm going to continue to be a proud communist. And I'm just going to say it loud and proud. I'm a communist. And I'm a communist because I've seen what personal property does to people. I've seen what it does to people on the receiving end and on the inflicting end. On the receiving end, I've received it personally, the bullshit of getting banned everywhere. And on the inflicting end, it warps people's minds. I mean, they were already fuck-ups to begin with. You know, Mark Anthony didn't just turn into the psycho that he is overnight. He's always been a shithead. But to have property only gives him the means to be a bigger shithead. To be a bigger shithead that can actually affect people's lives. And you know, as much as I talk about Mark Anthony and shit, he lives in a country where that kind of crap wouldn't fly. That's why Facebook and Google, YouTube, etc. are located in America, where corporations have no responsibility. They have barely any regulations, because, you know, America is just this fucked up place that thinks that private property is the greatest good, despite how it controls the most amount of people with the least amount of accountability and hurts the most resources. They intentionally destroy the natural environment for personal gain and profit. But It's the greatest good because competition breeds success, and, social Darwinian logic that as long as people are competing, they're growing stronger. Well, if you wanted that mentality, then just become a primitivist. Go around stabbing people with sharp sticks, and the fastest and smartest and most cunning will breed with the women and, grow space marine babies. It's stupid. It's extremely infantile and moronic. We are a collective society. We cooperate as a collective. The only reason any of this exists is because people are willing to participate in society. So it's about time you gave something back. Instead of looking at me and thinking I want to redistribute the wealth and getting all scared, why don't you think about how I want to redistribute the rights? How the rights belong to everybody. The rights belong to the workers. The rights belong to the people willing to cooperate with society even though they don't get all that much in return. The rights belong to the people, not to the bourgeois institutions, not to the moderators, not to the people who already get to make all the decisions because they own the land and the resources and get to boss people around. They belong to us, the people that don't get to boss anybody around, the people whose only life seems to be to get up, go to work, shit, and die. And we deserve better than that. That's really all I have to say.